Hello. When we're young, we make plans for the future and enjoy the fruition of those plans as life goes on. But as those become a reality, we often forget we also have to make plans for the future too, particularly about finances and care as we approach the end of life. Financial advisor John Grocke is here with some advice and words of wisdom. Welcome back, John.
Thank you, Malcolm.
We talked to you a month or two ago, and we were talking more about the financial situation in the country at the time and the changes in interest rate, and you predicted exactly what would happen, and it did. And there could be more, who knows? But we sort of talked at the very end of that program about really what does happen as we get older and what plans we need to make, both financially and physically, for the future. So should we just talk about some particular scenarios that might be helpful to answer?
Sure.
So I'm the age I am now, which is 23, and I'm thinking seriously about the end of my life. So I've got some property, I've got a little bit of money in the bank, and I'm thinking, so what do I really need to plan for as I get older?
One of the first things, Malcolm, would be make sure that you have your intentions in terms of who would receive what you have clearly documented in a will and various powers of attorney. And that probably applies to any age, actually, because unexpected things happen with the best of intention.
Sure.
And wills and powers of attorney are really a base point.
So a power of attorney is really what? How is that really defined?
The power of attorney can be a number of different authorities, but generally speaking, there's a medical power of attorney, and there's
that's
a financial.
if something happens and you can't make life decisions on your own, or in fact things have happened quite seriously and it's whether you turn it on or off.
Correct.
Yep.
It's probably more commonly known now as Advanced Care Directive,
Yes.
which can encompass a number of different authorities.
Right. And there's also a guardianship situation that could end up if perhaps you had dementia, or if you ended up down that path where you really can't look after yourself.
And guardianship would come into it if you didn't have other people designated to stand in behind you.
Right.
If you were a sole person and there was no one family-wise that could support you, and a guardianship board then may make an order and appoint someone to actually take over that role.
Or would appoint a government organisation to do that.
Correct.
Yep. Okay, so whatever money we've got, we can have, we've all got that little nest egg somewhere, even though it may be small. Mm-hmm. Should we really look at putting away a certain amount of money, even if it was like $10 a week or something, towards some sort of business investment?
One of the things that people will commonly consider is end-of-life arrangements, a funeral, for example, or a funeral plan.
Just explain a funeral plan. It's not actually saying, well, I want that to happen then and that to happen then. It's really more about the finances.
Correct. There's two clear types of provision for a funeral. One is where you would go to a funeral director and say, I would like to prepay for end-of-life arrangements. How much do I have to pay you? The alternative to that is to go to a friendly society who may offer you a funeral bond. Both have concessions under Centrelink, which may be important in terms of entitlement to age pension because they're considered exempt.
Right, we'll just go back to the first one.
Sure.
So what's involved with making that decision? What do I need to do?
I think one needs to just decide that they have an amount of money that they can set aside, and then actually inquire as to what the cost would be, and then determine.
So where do we inquire about that? Is that, or just go directly to a funeral home, obviously?
That's one way. The other way would be to go to a financial advisor and say, look, can you tell me about it?
Okay, so you pay X amount of dollars. Do you have to keep paying for that, or they hold your money and invest it so that as obviously the cost of funerals go up, it's going up in value at the same time? Is that how that works?
The funeral provision with a provider is generally an amount you pay and you pay no more.
So you don't have to worry about what happens to you at the end of life. Right. It's all taken care of. Is there a directive amongst that as to what you want? Like, do you want cheese on toast after the event?
That would include an outline of what you're looking for. The alternative to that, as you asked the question, is someone might say, look, I don't quite have a lump sum to do that. Can I make a payment over a period of time? Of course you can.
Right. So that's going to a funeral director or a funeral home
Correct.
to do that. What's the other alternative?
There is a key difference. The other alternative is a funeral bond. There's a key difference between the two. One is where you've given away a certain amount of money and that's going to provide for you for your end of life. The funeral bond might actually grow to a level that there's more than the cost of the funeral.
Right.
Any surplus in a funeral bond will come back to the estate.
Right. So you could have a cardboard box or a gold lined box.
Correct.
Depending on
Correct.
what you put aside. Okay. What else do we need to worry about? Because there is the concern of perhaps needing to go to a nursing home. I guess the worry there is, have I got enough in what I own? If I've rented a property my whole life and I've only got a small bank balance, what happens?
I guess this is where complexity comes in. Certainly if people are supported by the government and largely just on the age pension, there is sponsorship from government support to go into care. But I think, look,
But you don't get to choose, I guess, then the level of care you would go into.
It would be prescribed for you. You're quite correct.
Yep.
I think the other things that come into this, probably even before that, are the emotional journey, the fact that there's a level of significant change for people who have that imposed on them. So a family having a conversation about this well early in that particular journey
before things start going awry
is very important.
So what would you suggest? It's like when someone's over for dinner, when the family's over for dinner, or maybe before a birthday event or something, look, I just want to talk about what my plans are for the future and how I'd like you to be involved. Is that the best way to do it?
If you were the elderly person talking about that, that'd be perfect. Getting the family together, have a conversation. Most often though, it's not like that, and people tend to avoid the conversation.
Well, we don't want to think that we're not going to be here forever, is the truth.
And it applies to us as much as anybody else. That journey is different for everybody.
Sure. I guess the hard part about this is when something does happen, it could be an accident, it could be an ongoing health problem, and suddenly the family are hit with making these decisions, whether it happens to be your wishes or not, and a group that care for you have to take over. And that's often a difficult journey.
It's a very difficult journey because people feel that it's being imposed on them, the person who needs the support. The best outcomes I've seen in the experience I've had are where the conversations occurred well before it had to be. Very often it's the other side of it as well, where it's left until it has to be.
Yep. And that's very difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's very difficult, and we've both experienced this in our lives as well. So the advice you're giving is really good advice when you think of it in those terms. So just sort of in very simple terms, if I was buying a funeral plan, just going back to that thought for a minute,
Sure.
is there amount of money that we need to have in our head that I've got, say, $10,000, is that enough?
A funeral director or funeral directors will have a package which varies. If you're prepaying that and then you pay no more. A funeral bond, which is provided by, say, Friendly Society, $13,500 is the level that's Centrelink exempt.
Okay. So you can save yourself some money by actually putting that away at this point.
It may actually enhance your age pension a bit.
Right, that's if you're on a pension. But what about somebody who's self-funded?
If someone's self-funded, it's really a choice of, do I have sufficient resources for family to call on, or do I choose to make that provision?
Right. They're difficult decisions to make, aren't they? Particularly when we don't want to face the facts. We'll be back in a tick and we'll talk a little bit more with John. There's a few more questions that I'm sure you'll be interested in. We'll be back in a tick. We're talking to John Grocke, who's a financial advisor, and we're talking about basically what to do for the end of life. A subject nobody wants to really talk about, but it's something that we really need to address, not so much just for us, but it's also for our families, because the chances are that they'll outlive us. But these days, John, we're living so much longer.
Correct.
And because of that, is there a percentage of people who maybe need to end up in sort of advanced care of some description?
I think current statistics indicate it's probably 1 in 10 or about 12% of the population.
Right.
But that figure's probably creeping up because we are living longer.
Yep.
Which means there's more evidence of people suffering from dementia, etc. But ultimately it comes down to...
But it's not only dementia either. It's, everything could be fabulous upstairs, but the basement's falling apart.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, about 1 in 10 or a little bit more at the moment in our population do require 24/7 support in later years.
So we don't know when that's going to happen, do we? No. And we think about it, the government set up super, so there's super when we retire, but some of us don't actually retire. And we go on living and doing, different jobs or continue to do the job that we've already done or always done in life. Which means that through life, if we've had children, we've probably tried to help our kids out with buying a home or getting a car loan or whatever, and our resources may have dropped a bit. What's the best advice you can give, particularly in those situations where, as parents, we want to give our kids the best opportunities in life?
It's a complex question because I think...
Sorry about that, but I'm sure you can find 16 answers.
Sure. I think everyone does want to support their family,
sure,
but one also needs to make sure that there's a bit in reserve. I think for our generation, probably the thing that's most obvious is there's a house that we live in, which is a significant resource that can be called on if necessary. But I think it's worth adding that organisations won't necessarily ask simply for one form of payment. It might be a combination of income payments and a lump sum.
This is if we do need 24-hour care.
That's right, right, correct.
But there's also the situation now that the government is offering a lot more at-home care. So where does that fit? Do we pay for that, or does the government pay for that to keep us at home?
I think the government have an intended plan to get people supported at home, so people can live at home longer.
Sure, but the pension and or as super, is that intended to pay for that sort of care?
It's interesting you talk about super because there is a bit of talk on the current government of imposing on people a requirement to spend some of their super potentially for later support
looking after
and care.
yourself.
Correct.
Basically, yeah.
However, councils generally have a range of services that they'll provide at a concessional rate as part of your rates and taxes. So
this is to do things like clean out the gutters perhaps, or
correct,
or weed the garden or prune the garden.
I think we need to just add one further thing. There's really 4 categories when someone's assessed for support, 1 through to 4. 4 is the extreme, 24/7 support. So as we graduate through that, if we do need to graduate through it, there's different services and support that people can call on.
And that's accessible through local council?
Local council certainly can provide at-home support for a concessional fee.
And does that come through a recommendation from, say, a GP? How does that happen?
It would probably be based on the assessment that ultimately occurs through a GP, where someone is categorised as needing some support at home.
Right. And that can be simple things also, like perhaps cleaning.
Sure. Or even doing the washing.
Shopping.
Doing the washing or helping with shopping, correct.
Yeah, right. See, that's the thing. We sort of don't want to learn about these things when we're younger because we just don't want to face that end of life thought. But the fact is, we really have to.
And driving, it's worth mentioning driving because that can be a key pivot point.
Yeah. Losing a licence, something you've had since you were maybe,
Absolutely.
16, 17, 18, and having that independence must be a huge blow.
It's often difficult to get to that point. And through some personal experiences, often GPs are reluctant to call loss of licence too early because it does take away that independence. But it's actually...
Which also changes the way that we actually think about ourselves, because suddenly losing just that one thing can really, knock over the marbles on the floor sort of thing.
And not everyone has family who are able to or nearby to help with shopping, for example, which you mentioned.
Well, that's the other change in life, isn't it? Because I was talking to a friend today who said, my daughter has definitely said she will look after me. Whatever happens in my life, my daughter will look after me. And I have no doubt that will happen. But the reality is you're actually pushing yourself onto somebody who hasn't had their full life yet. Like it's a great responsibility, and most children, I'm sure, would be there to help their parents. But it actually gets to a point where their life is gone because they're providing for you 24/7.
It can actually be overwhelming, and then understanding the point at which it is becoming overwhelming and a conversation about a different type of support.
Well, you become the carer.
Yes.
And then when does the carer get the care? I know things are in place for that to happen. But let's go back to the money side of things.
Sure.
So most of us probably aren't going to go to a financial advisor because we're so clever we can handle it all by ourselves. But the reality is we do need advice on these things. We do need advice on how much do we need to have? Where do we put our finances or our resources? Because now there's so many online things that we can invest in, and at the same time there's the online crooks out there that are trying to get our money for themselves. How do we navigate through this? I'm planning for the future. Where do I go financially?
There are organisations which specifically deal with aged care, associations.
Even not aged care, even like from 50 plus.
Well, from 50 plus, I mean, there's a seniors card that you can get once you're over 60.
Goodness, I've got one of them. I must have got it early. Such rubbish comes out this mouth at times, honestly.
So look, I think people need to work out what support they need.
Although we don't necessarily know what that's going to be. That's the whole problem in this case, isn't it?
Well, it is.
So
it is.
I'm sure you've advised a lot of people in this sense. Okay, so I do have a house because I was in the generation that we could buy houses. Yep. I've helped my kids out in life. I've been generous with charities and all of those things, and I've just got X amount of dollars, let's say 50,000 left over. And I've saved and I've got 50,000 in the bank. What should I do with it?
One of the big decisions, the early decisions, is the property that I'm in fit for purpose, or is it now beyond my capability?
Well, that's interesting too. There's another side to that I've just realised. It's not just the fit for purpose, but has it been maintained that it's fit for purpose for me to continue to live in?
The property might need adjustments so that it can accommodate certain frailties, but...
But what about the frailties of vines growing through the roof and, the taps leaking and simple things like that? I mean, I'm coming to terms with this where I live because I'm thinking, my house is now 50 years old and it needs that fixed, So I've been on a bit of a mission making sure that everything's good for me for the next few years, that I'm not going to have to worry. But that does cost some money, but it also gives me some sort of assurance that a major thing isn't going to happen. Like the wall isn't going to crack and fall over or something that's going to cost me a whole lot more. Sure. It's a maintenance, I guess, of our properties as well we need to consider.
Definitely, and the maintenance that you do on your property maintains its value so that it continues to be worth something if you do need to sell it.
Yeah.
But the point I was making is probably that downsizing step, understanding at what point people might consider retirement village, let's talk retirement village accommodation. where services are provided and there's additional support that maybe that person doesn't get at home.
Well, we've actually talked to people on the program about exactly that and the different types of retirement villages where, like a caravan park, you can own the actual building, but you don't own the land underneath it, which seems like a good idea to me. Or you can buy into one of the villages that obviously can move on in a real estate sale after the event.
Yes.
So really what we're talking about is roughly 12% of people might need full care. Do you know what percentage need part care?
It's a difficult question. The thing that clouds the issue is the NDI scheme, so the disability scheme, because a lot of people have graduated into that where they need some level of support, rightfully so, and so it's probably difficult to really define that as clearly as perhaps we could historically.
The other good thing is there's a Disability and Ageing Expo that's just been here in South Australia. And those things exist to help you make those decisions so you can see the facilities that are available. There are nursing homes there, there are support services if you need a walking frame or a walker, or if you need a stick and what height it should be, simple things like that. Things do exist that we can plan as we get older that maybe we should be looking at sort of in our late 50s, 60s, just to see, okay, if I need that, I know that exists. If I need that, I know that exists.
I think it's actually being inquisitive enough to actually find out what we don't know and what we might need before we do.
You made such a good point there, because we're inquisitive enough to find out about a house or a job or something else, and then we think, okay, we're set for life. But that word for life, we don't necessarily take into account.
No.
In your experience as a financial advisor, after the death of somebody and sort of cleaning up their estate, how difficult is that? Actually, hold the thought, because we'll be back in a moment for John to answer that question, I hope. John Grocke is our guest on this program, and we've been talking about what to do. The last question I asked was, what happens after someone passes to their estate that they have hopefully set up?
If they have a valid will, the first step is that they need to get the government to confirm that it's actually valid.
Oh, and that they've gone, I suppose.
Well, I suppose that they're gone, a death certificate, absolutely.
Yeah. And the executive trustees or the public trustees take over these things?
It depends on the circumstance. Some people might appoint public trustee,
right?
If it's
or may have a person,
or have one or more people who are acting executors.
Yeah.
And so they have then a legal responsibility to bring together the assets of the person's estate and then distribute them according to that person.
Well, again, that's more work for somebody who may be coping with the grief of losing somebody that they cared for.
Yes.
But what if I haven't made those plans?
Very interesting. People probably, in many cases, don't even think about that. But the government actually have a will established for you, which is under their rules. So it's called intestate. You die without a will, and then the government bring in their will. And interestingly, the people that might be entitled to your estate is much broader than you might think, and it's not necessarily what people would wish to happen and want to happen.
Right. So really, at the end of the day, the things we've discussed is probably sort out a funeral plan of some description and do it sooner rather than later. Maybe first make a will. Make sure you've made a will.
That's really important.
And make sure that you're very clear about who you want to leave your very precious things to, whether they want them or not. To make sure you're providing, you've got something providing for you as you age. If you own a house, that's your biggest nest egg to have, to look after you as you age if you need it. Anything else? They're the three biggies.
No, I think the conversation piece with family, if you feel that your capabilities are changing. difficult but very important.
But do it sooner rather than later.
Yes.
John, thanks for that. I hope for you that advice has been good and that you actually take action on it. So good luck with your future, John.
Yeah, thank you, and likewise.
Yeah, thank you. So until next time on Our Time, keep yourself nice till then. Bye.